Hi, I'm Isabel Thornton, Executive Director of Restoration Housing. In this segment of our Architectural Minute series, we'll look at a century of change on Gilmer Avenue in the Gainsboro Historic District of Northwest Roanoke with local historian Jordan Bell. The section of Roanoke referred to as Gainsboro in Northwest Roanoke was actually formed long before the broader city of Roanoke was established. It started out as a small collection of buildings near the present-day intersection of Orange Avenue and I-581, and didn't begin to develop more robustly until 1882, when the Norfolk and Western Railway established their headquarters in Roanoke, and speculative home construction boomed. The neighborhood of Gainsboro grew rapidly along with the rest of the city, and by 1921 it was in the midst of its most significant period in history, rising in prominence as the center of the African American community in Roanoke. Many residential, commercial, and institutional buildings were built in this interwar period of growth in Gainsboro, representing a variety of architectural styles ranging from Queen Anne, Tudor, Colonial Revival, American Foursquare, Craftsman, and even Art Deco. But what is most fascinating is its eclectic and vibrant social history. The 400 block of Gilmer Avenue is a microcosm of Gainsboro as a whole, and significant in and of itself. This is a street where stately Queen Anne-style homes owned by prominent physicians and lawyers sat alongside simple vernacular homes of working-class families. It was a close-knit community that supported each other and saw many of its residents emerge as leaders in education, medicine, and law.
Thank you for joining us again, Jordan. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the houses we're standing in front of.
So this is one of my favorite parts of Gainsboro. We're standing in front of Oliver Hill's childhood home, Edward Dudley's childhood home, and then Dr. James Roberts' home. And Dr. Roberts was one of the founding members of Borough Memorial Hospital. Edward Dudley will become the first black ambassador, and then Oliver Hill will become a famous civil rights attorney.
So what would this street have looked like 100 years ago?
You would have saw Edward Dudley and Oliver Hill, sitting on whoever's front porch, talking, mingling with one another. And then Dr. Roberts would have been walking out of his front door, going to work at the hospital. And his daughter, Margaret, always talks about him going to the backyard, picking a rose from the rose bush, putting it on his lapel and going to work. So that's what you would have seen on Gilmer Avenue in this respective block of 400, the 400 block 100 years ago.
The community of Gainsboro created its own businesses, churches, hospitals, and schools out of necessity from the Jim Crow era of segregation. This limited African American residents' access to other businesses and institutions in other parts of the city. But, like the creative energy that emerged from Henry Street, the limitations thrust upon them cultivated generations of activists and leaders who would ultimately challenge regressive and racist laws and institutions on a national level.
So could you tell us a little bit more about Oliver Hill's work in the case of Brown versus Board of Education?
So Brown versus the Board of Education case was, of course, the school integration case nationwide, but it was multiple cases put together, and Oliver Hill and his colleague Spotswood Robertson in Richmond, Virginia, fought a case in Prince Edward County. And what they did was they fought for school integration, but that county actually closed the school district for I think 8 to 9 years, just refusing to allow African Americans to attend their schools. And so Oliver Hill, fighting on that case, put together multiple cases with Thurgood Marshall, and they created Brown versus the Board of Education case.
That's incredible. And right next door to one of the first African American ambassadors, or the first African American.
Edward Dudley was the first black ambassador during the Truman administration. He was ambassador to Liberia, and then he became a New York State Supreme Court justice, and he passed away at the age of 93. So this was a very important street and important homes.
Absolutely. So across the street, another one day famous historian. Tell us a little bit about what you've got going on across the street.
So the home I bought on Gilmer Avenue at 404, it's this one right here. It's 120 years old. I bought it a year ago. So I'm doing my best trying to bring some vibrancy back to this area with restoring this home, and it's an important neighborhood, important community. I'm just trying to do my part.
Similar to southeast Roanoke, Gainsboro's population began to decline in the 1950s when the American viscose plant closed, and the conversion of steam to diesel by Norfolk and Western sent many residents looking for employment elsewhere. This trend was inadvertently compounded by the civil rights movement that ended segregation and negated the need for the insular and interdependent community that had originally grown from the Jim Crow era. And while the residential section of Gainsboro was relatively spared from urban renewal in the 1960s and 1970s, as compared to northeast Roanoke, many homes were still taken by eminent domain, demolished or burned, and larger city-led developments were built in their wake, such as the Berglund Center and I-581.
So what do you feel like is the biggest difference between this block now versus 100 years ago?
The neighborhood pride in it. 100 years ago, you knew your neighbor, you knew your community member, and so you really took care of one another. 100 years later, because of policies and urban renewal and different things like that, that kind of neighborhood pride has been stripped away and taken away. So kind of trying to bring that back and working on that is very important, because that's what it was 100 years ago.
And how do you think neighborhood pride can be, recreated?
Just by, doing the small, I like to do small things, maybe cutting your grass, or maybe knocking on your neighbor's door and asking them, do they need some help, or just doing simple things, neighborhood trash pickups, different things like that will help community members see that, hey, somebody's, actually thinking of my neighborhood, thinking of my community, let me do my part.
We need more young people like you probably coming in too.
Yes, so young people buying homes in the neighborhood, not leaving, moving to different areas will really help in that, because Roanoke is a growing city, and Gainsboro is close to downtown, so just trying to figure out how we can bring young people into the neighborhood as well.
There is so much to build on in the neighborhood of Gainsboro. Over 200 buildings contribute to the national and state designated Gainsboro Historic District. Neighborhood organizations such as Historic Gainsboro Preservation District and Gainsboro Southwest Community Organization regularly meet and collaborate on initiatives to improve quality of life and maintain the neighborhood's character. And Gainsboro's well-documented history is shared with the larger community through interpretive signage and walking tours. It is humbling to see the incredible resilience of this historic neighborhood, despite decades of turmoil, through the dedication of those committed to its preservation and vibrant future.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jordan. Is there anything else that you want to share about the history here?
We had Edward Dudley, Oliver Hill, and Dr. Roberts, but a lot of people don't know that Lucy Addison also lived on Gilmer Avenue. She lived in the 300 block of Gilmer Avenue. And then Reuben Lawson, who was also a civil rights attorney, he lived in the 200 block of Gilmer Avenue. So again, it's just a very important street.
In the water.
It was something in the water about Gilmer Avenue. I'm not sure what it was, but a lot of important people, important, nationwide and worldwide people lived on Gilmer Avenue. So that's really important to me, and I take pride in that.
Yeah, it's I think one of the most fascinating pieces of Roanoke's history, all in one block.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This concludes this installment of our Architectural Minute series. We hope you've enjoyed virtually visiting 4 historic neighborhoods in Roanoke with us.